week 8 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I looked at on the waiver wire this week. The first guy is Renfrow of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Renfrow, pretty decent game once again in week 7 for him versus Philly. 7 catches, 58 yards. So right here, he's had double-digit fantasy points in every game this season, except one in PPR league. So right here, he's a favorite target of Derek Carr. And he had a good ball game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The only thing here, the Raiders go on bye now in week 8 here. But still, he's a guy to keep in mind. He's a guy to add on the waiver wire. And he's a good guy to have as your third wide receiver on your team or a flex option each and every week. Just like I mentioned, he's pretty much getting double-digit targets a game. He's getting double-digit fantasy points pretty much every game. And right here, Renfrow is still available in 51% of fantasy leagues. And he's definitely a player I would add this week. The next guy, Kahlil Raymond of the Detroit Lions. So Kahlil Raymond, he made a lot of nice catches in that week 7 ball game versus the Los Angeles Rams. And they played hard, the Lions. They tried to pull out all the stops. It was like a Super Bowl game here to Dan Campbell with all the onside kick attempts, obviously fake punts, throws and stuff, but they just couldn't get the job done. But Kahlil Raymond, the last 3 out of 4 weeks, he's been a viable fantasy option. Week 4 at Chicago, 3 catches, 46 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 5 in Minnesota, he did nothing, 2 targets, no catches. Week 6 versus Cincinnati, 6 catches, 37 yards. And Week 7 versus the Rams, 8 targets, 6 catches, and 115 yards. So right here in Week 8, he's got a good matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles, where we see a lot of teams just go up and down the field on them. And in this game, I think it's going to be a mini shootout in Week 8 versus Philly and the Detroit Lions. And Kahlil Raymond, he's definitely a player that's a playmaker on this Lion offense. And he's a guy that Jared Goff definitely trusts and the coaching staff likes. So right here, Raymond's available in a whopping 97% of fantasy leagues. And he's definitely a wide receiver that people should look at and add this week. The next wide receiver I would look to get on the wire this week is Jefferson Jr. Los Angeles Rams. So Jefferson, a good ball game in his second year here in week 7. 4 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown. So we've seen one good game and one bad game. But offense, Matthew Stafford, he spreads the ball out to all his receivers and tight ends. 1 week it's Cooper Kupp with a huge game, even though all season it's been him. Robert Woods, a good game. Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson. So a lot of options on this offense. But Jefferson, he's becoming more of a deep threat and a red zone target. And we saw him catch a great jump ball in the back of the end zone for a touchdown in this game. And week 8, it's at Houston, a fast track indoors. Houston can't stop no one. We know they're a struggling team at 1-6 on the season. And I think Jefferson could be a decent sleeper option next week. But he's definitely a guy that should get more attention and added in fantasy leagues, especially him playing more snaps, more targets. And he's on one of the best offenses in all of football. And he's available in 91% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver is Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons. So Russell Gage, he came back from injury, and he played a great ball game in week 7 in Miami. 4 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown. So he only played 2 games this season. And coming into the season, there were high hopes here for Russell Gage, with obviously Julio Jones out of town and Calvin Ridley moving to the number 1 receiver spot and him being the number 2 guy. So right here in week 7, he played like the number 2 guy. He's available in 90% of fantasy leagues. And week 8, he's got another good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, where we saw giant receivers have good games versus. So right here, Russell Gage, he's a perfect flex option, especially with all the bye weeks, or a number 3 wide receiver if you play in 3 receiver leagues to start next week versus Carolina, in my opinion. And the 5th and final wide receiver I would look to get is Rashod Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens. So Bateman, a rookie, obviously, and in his second career game in the NFL, had a pretty decent one in week 7 versus Cincinnati. 3 catches, 80 yards. In week 6 versus the Chargers, he had 4 catches, 29 yards. I know week 8's a bye week here for Baltimore, but right here, he's definitely a guy with great breakout potential that he's healthy now, learning the playbook as he goes. And Lamar Jackson, in my opinion, he does trust him. In the first 2 games back, Bateman's already got 12 targets, which is a good sign. And they need receiver help. Besides Hollywood Brown, Bateman and Duvernay are the only really other 2 options with Sammy Watkins hurt. But right here, I think Bateman's a good playmaker he fits this offense well, and he's definitely a wide receiver I look to add this week, and he's available in 68% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few wide receivers I looked at on the waiver wire for week 8 of the fantasy football season.